running, and so in your name, what's your name?
I'm Trent.
Trent, nice to meet you,
Nice to meet
Trent.
you too. How are you?
Sarah.
Sarah, nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Lupe. This is
Lupe.
Lupe.
Oh, hey, Lupe.
Oh, I'm gonna see you tomorrow.
Yeah, we're gonna have lunch tomorrow.
In depth.
Heather.
Heather, nice to meet you, Heather. Great.
Okay.
Oh, so this is like the most interesting, I've been doing this for 21 years, this is the most interesting thing I've ever had to do. It's amazing. 21 years ago, I'd get a page, I'd have to find a payphone, I'd have to call the number, I'd have to get the information, then turn around, call the agent. It was crazy. Now we can do this. Amazing. It's amazing. Got it, Chuck?
Well, let's see if we can.
There you go. Yeah, you can see it. Is that a
Can you
good
guys see?
view
Can
for
you guys
you?
see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sale.
All right.
To his left, I think.
First of all, I apologize for this confusion this morning. Jan and I thought that with this canceled. Obviously, you guys are all here, and let's see if we can start this. All right, we okay?
Yes.
So, this should be very interesting. All right, so I'll start off by just asking this. What do sellers expect from their real estate agents? I would answer this way. Integrity, reliability, sincerity, consistency, commitment, and competence. But I think the number one thing that a seller expects from their agent is going to be trust. So with that said, and this is probably wrong, I want to talk about the importance of due diligence within the NHD industry as it applies to you guys and the sellers of real estate. So, risk, because that's what this report is all about, is protecting your risk. So, whose liability is it at risk when disclosing natural hazards? And the answer is, all you got to do is look at a natural hazard disclosure statement. Every company, no matter who you use, will give you this document. This is called the Natural Hazard Disclosure Statement. It's a form from CAR, or from the government actually. And what does it say? If you read down here at the signature line, the agent signs this report. That would be the agent representing the seller. And if you read this box down here, it says transferor and their agents acknowledge that they've exercised good faith. So make no mistake about it. You as an agent are equally liable for disclosing natural hazards. Okay? So let's talk about the NHD industry for a second. Let's say I walked into your office. Is that are you guys seeing that backwards?
No.
No.
That's good.
Okay. Okay. Let's say I walked into your office and I said to you, hey, I'm going to open up my own, you guys don't even know who I am. I walked in and I said, hey, I'm going to open up my own NHD company. I'm not qualified at all to do this. In fact, I'm just going to go buy data from a data provider. I'm going to put this data on my letterhead. I'm going to formulate a report and I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to sell it to you. And by the way, if I happen to make a mistake, don't come to me because I'm not going to protect you. How many of you would purchase an NHD report from me? Would anybody?
Nobody raised their hand.
Nobody would raise your hand. Of course not. But I'm saying after being in this industry for 22 years, I can tell you that a major majority of NHD providers, if they were telling you the truth, that would be their dialogue. I have no experience. I have no qualifications. I'm going to purchase data and I'm going to give it to you. And if there's a mistake, don't come to me. And what do we have? What's that look like? Well, without proper government supervision or even an association that binds all these NHD companies together, NHD providers can and do provide these reports in any manner in which they choose, whether they're in compliance with the law or not. That is wrong by anybody's measure. That's not the way this industry should work. So my presentation is really intended to enlighten awareness or heighten awareness of the effects of non-regulation in this industry. And I want to give a voice to the people who have no voice in this transaction as far as the selection of an NHD provider goes, and that's to sellers. Sellers, we're in a really odd kind of a place here that our clients, the people that actually pay for the report, we never meet them. They rely on their real estate agents to put them in a place that's safe for them. So let's give a voice to the seller. And I'll just tell you, they might not say this to you verbally, but if you could take your real estate hat off for a minute and become a seller of real estate, not an agent, but like the people that you represent, become a seller of real estate. Let me tell you what they're really saying to you. I expect my agent to purchase a disclosure report on my behalf from a company that satisfies my legal disclosure requirements, as well as defend me if I were to be sued for non-disclosure or incorrect disclosure. So let's look at, and if anybody needs to interrupt me, just do so. Let's look at non-regulation and what happens in non-regulation. Like I said before, this industry is largely comprised of unqualified entrepreneurs that don't even employ qualified experts to produce their reports in compliance with the seller's legal disclosure requirements. And now, how easy is it to get and sell NHD reports? Well, there are no licenses or certifications given to NHD providers. There's no background checks. Bonds aren't necessary. No one validates insurance. No one validates qualification. Nobody even confirms compliance with government requirements. Anybody can open up an NHD company. So here's your options. And there are dozens of options out there for you. But most, by a large percentage, of these guys are not qualified. All but 2 of these NHD companies are unqualified entrepreneurs selling non-compliant reports to trusting real estate agents. So I would say, be careful. This is what this industry offers you. Non-compliant reports produced by non-qualified providers that fill the report with unnecessary subjective disclosures that are disclosures that are made up by the NHD provider, inadequate or zero liability protection, dangerous legal loopholes, out-of-state arbitration, and actually providers with zero E&O insurance. So why is careful vetting of NHD companies necessary? Because if you simply assume that an NHD company produces a report in compliance with the law and will defend you if they make a mistake, is a very risky assumption. You know, I've gone to the San Diego Association of Realtors and have spoken in front of the Risk Management Committee with this very argument that companies need to vet these reps that walk into your office and want to sell NHD reports to you. This industry is out of control because it's so easy to produce a report and sell it to you. So you might ask, what could go wrong with an NHD report? Well, they could miss hazards. They could not disclose required information. They could exclude a very important level of information, and that's locally identified hazard zones. They could get the tax disclosure completely wrong. You know, after 22 years in this industry, I've asked almost in every presentation, do you know how to disclose Mello-Roos? Now, you guys sell property in Mello-Roos areas, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, it's a very complicated disclosure of Mello-Roos. It's a 6-part component to disclose Mello-Roos. And a lot of these providers out there simply go to like the tax roll and copy information on the tax roll and put that on a disclosure report. That doesn't satisfy the seller's legal disclosure requirements. They could use outdated maps, or the report could be produced on the wrong parcel. But what's worse is that you can discover that the NHD provider has no liability protection. Now, I just want to show you, and this might be a little bit difficult for you to see, but this is a lawsuit that came across my desk recently. And what does it say right here? It says that the respondent had no insurance and refused to pay the petitioner's defense claim. That means that this NHD company was sued for misinformation, and the NHD company did not have E&O to cover it. And what's the number one reason why you use an NHD company? It's simple. It's to provide you and your client with liability protection. Why else would you use an NHD company? It's because they supposedly protect your liability. I think the assumption is if you get a report and it's wrong, my company will step up and defend the report. That's not a given. So let's look at the seller again. What's the seller saying to you? Are you 100% certain that the NHD company you selected for me provides me with ample liability protection? When was the last time you checked? So think about this. If there's nobody regulating this industry, well, that would just promote non-compliance. And then non-compliance would promote litigation, the very thing you're trying to protect yourself from. So according to California Civil Code, do you know who can legally produce an NHD report for you? And if you look at the Civil Code, it's pretty simple. What it says is the delivery of a report or an opinion prepared by a licensed engineer, a land surveyor, a geologist, or an expert in natural hazard discovery dealing with matters within the scope of the professional's license shall be sufficient compliance. So I would argue, based on Civil Code, if your report isn't produced by a qualified professional, the report is insufficient. So non-regulation simply means that there's no accountability for any of these companies to use qualified experts to produce the report. So the biggest red flag in the NHD industry is that anybody, qualified or not, can produce these reports and sell them to you. All right, let's take a look at some pictures. Now, is this being shown on a big screen in there?
No, just a little laptop.
Okay. So everybody's huddled around this laptop. Oh, you guys, I'm so sorry. Let's take a look at some pictures here, because everybody likes to see pictures. And we'll start with this house right here. Now, you guys might have remembered this house. This is from 2005. This is a house up in Oceanside. It was on the news every night. And there were reporters standing at this angle, and they were waiting for the house to fall down. So I went up there with my camera, and I noticed that the garage door was open, so I went to the garage door, and this is what I saw when I looked in there. And what you can see here is the barrier from the driveway to the garage floor. The garage floor was being converted into some type of a room. But you can see, I can get a little closer here, and you can see the crack in the garage floor. Here's a 6-foot ladder right here. So you can see, I don't know, what do you put on the TDS there? Crack noted in garage floor.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Then you look in the living room, and you can see the living room now is almost like a split-level home. And the house next door, if you look at this slab, if you look at that slab, let's go back here. That slab used to be straight out. Now it's at a 90-degree angle. And what's happening is all of this yard is going down the hill. So I went down the hill into the neighbor's yard, and this is what I saw. And if you look closely, this is the coping for a pool. So that's what's left of their swimming pool. All that dirt that would have been on their house if they didn't have a pool. So the house looked like this one day. I went up there a couple of weeks later, and it looked like this. And if you were to go there today, you'd find empty lot. Then we'll look at this property here. This is in Bonita a few years ago. And one of my reps called me and said she was at a caravan meeting, and all the agents were talking about the house that was ready to fall down the hill on Prey Street. So I drove my car there, and this is what I saw from the street below. Then I got into the backyard, and as you can see, the landslide went right back just to the foundation of the house, and it's a pretty long drop to the street below. So the question would be, what's non-regulation look like to you? 7 out of 8 NHD providers failed to disclose the hazards associated with those properties. And the reason why is because these guys purchase data from data providers that don't look at all of the available local maps. So I would just pose a simple question to every professional real estate agent in there. And that would be, who would you rather have producing your NHD report? A geologist with 30 years of experience? You already want this guy. Because there's a lot more entrepreneurs doing this gig than anybody else. And what's the seller saying? The seller would say, I should feel confident that my agent has carefully selected an NHD company that employs a qualified expert, produces my report in compliance with the law, and provides me with ample liability protection. I don't think anybody would argue with that, nor do I think you would argue with that if you were selling your house. That's what you would expect from your agent, is to put you in a safe place so that you're not exposed to liability. All right, now, do we have any questions so far? Okay,
No.
go on.
I do.
Yes.
Yes.
Are you going to cover the fact that why you might be better than property ID? Because we had them here.
Well, did you see that lawsuit I just put up there?
Yeah,
That was the.
Property ID lawsuit.
really?
Yes.
'Cause they were saying something that you guys didn't have. I forgot what it was, but like made it like we had to go with them, otherwise, you know. But I don't
Well-
use them, I've only used Disclosure Source, just letting you know, that's why I told Brandon to have you guys come.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Well, we appreciate it. Are you a member of CAR?
yes,
CAR does not recognize property ID. CAR does not invite property ID to any CAR sponsored event. They're not allowed to go to the Car Expo. They haven't been allowed to go to the Car Expo for probably the last 8 years or so. Property ID is kind of known as a litigation company
interesting.
that uses natural hazards disclosures kind of as a platform for their business model. And they claim that they're the father of NHD. They make a lot of pretty wild claims, but I would just simply say, if your own trade association doesn't recognize property ID, why would you? I'll just leave it at that. I could go on and on. You know, they don't have maps on their reports, which are a really good tool. They don't produce their tax reports in compliance with the law. There's a lot of things that are different between us and them, and that just really goes to the basis of this presentation. You know, unqualified NHD providers produce reports in any manner they choose. And I'm going to get to this in a second. You'll see right here. There are required disclosures and there are subjective disclosures. Required, of course, those are determined by California law. And subjective, those are designed by the NHD provider. In other words, they're not legally required, but the NHD company just creates them and puts them in their reports. So according to California Civil Code, there are only about 13 required disclosures, and everybody should pretty much know what those are. Special flood hazard zones, fire zones, earthquake zones, seismic hazard zones. You'll see the list right here. But according to at least one provider, and I'll just tell you since you asked, this would be property ID. There are, according to property ID, 34 required disclosures. That's over 20 additional disclosures that aren't required by law. That's over 20 additional non-required disclosures that were devised by Property ID for marketing purposes only. And let me just show you what that looks like on a report. It's really just page after page after page of stuff that is not required, that just adds liability to your transaction. It's more decisions for the buyer, and it's just not sensible risk management policy to load the report up with stuff that you don't need. First of all, you're not doing your seller a favor by having the seller disclose more than he's required to disclose. And secondly, you're adding more decisions to the buyer, because every time a buyer looks at a disclosure report, subconsciously they have to decide whether or not they want to continue with the purchase of a house. So to me, why would you make more decisions when minimum would be the best way to do that? And let me show you how they do this. And this is a copy and paste off of a property ID report. And I don't want this to get into a property ID versus disclosure source, but I do want to show you the difference. So every one of these disclosures on here comes from a property ID report. And if you just read it, it really doesn't make sense. Let's just look at all of these. And what do they all say? Well, each line starts off with subject property is what? Located in an area. Now, I look at that and I wonder, what is an area? Because I would say, first of all, this is an area.
Yeah, true.
This is a hazard zone. I could also say that this is an area. This is a hazard zone. So, look, you could go on and on. That's an area. Look, you could say to somebody, hey, I'm selling you a house in California. That's an area with a lot of floods, fires, and earthquakes. That's not the way disclosure works. Area is not definable. Area is not property specific. Area is not considered statutory disclosure. In fact, area is the marketing of needless information. And I'll show you another page off the report, because this time, you can't make this stuff up. I took out where it said property ID. But what it says here, the subject property is located, okay, so they're making a disclosure here. Subject property is located in an area. Okay, what area? Well, it's an area where sightings of rare species or natural communities have been recorded, including the following: monarch butterfly. So think about that for a second. This disclosure is disclosing that this property is in an area where people have seen monarch butterflies. Who knew?
Wow.
So to me, what's the point in adding needless disclosures for your seller and for yourself? What's the point in providing disclosures that have not been approved by the government? What's the point in accepting any disclosure that's based on the subjective opinion of a non-qualified NHD provider? You kind of see where I'm going here? That's why this industry is kind of a mess. What's the seller saying? If it's not legally required, why would I disclose something that some NHD company independently created? Now, there's a common sense way to address some of these issues, and that would be to provide through the report a series of advisories. And the reason why is because an advisory is simply an opinion or a recommendation offered as a guide to action. An advisory is based on relevant information. And an advisory, the best thing about it, it removes liability from you and your seller. Think about that for a second. Advisories remove liability, the very thing you're trying to avoid. So I'm going to show you a map, and I'm going to ask you if you know what this map is disclosing. Does anybody know how to look at this map and what this map is showing us? I'll tell you what, the red lines would be freeways. You got Balboa Park down here. The red star would represent the subject property. And you see a lot of blue squares on this map. Anybody know what the blue squares are?
Listings, prop.
I've heard that before. Property listings, I've heard Starbucks, I've heard expired listings, I've heard a bunch of stuff. I'll give you a hint. Here's the hint.
Sex offenders?
There you go. California sex offender locator map. Okay? Now let's get rid of these guys, and I'll ask you a simple question. Who wants this page included in their NHD report? Anybody?
No.
All right, let's.
No one's saying, no answers.
What?
All right, no, all right. So I'll just take it from here. Let's assume this page was in your NHD report, and you were reviewing the report with your buyer. Okay, and the buyer, you're going through it. You go, look, the property is not in an earthquake zone. It's not in a landslide zone. Then you come to this page, and the buyer goes, "What's this?" And you go, "Oh, these are just the sex offenders in the neighborhood."
Yeah, they're just sex offenders.
Okay, what's the buyer going to do?
No, thank you.
Freak out.
Yeah.
The buyer's going to say, "Show me another house." Okay, and then you go to the next house, and the map looks the same.
Yeah.
Okay, so nobody wants this map as part of their NHD report, but you must make Megan's Law. You got to deal with Megan's Law. How do you do it? You give them a web address.
Yep.
Okay, and basically you would say, hey, look, there are sex offenders in California, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. If you would like more information about them, here's where to go look. And you give them the address. That's called an advisory. And what an advisory does is it shifts the responsibility of discovery over to the buyer, and it relieves the seller and the seller's agent of any liability. No agent gets sued for sex offenders in the neighborhood because you tell the buyer to go look for it themselves. So with Disclosure Source, as you probably know, we give you about 4 pages of advisories that include live links. So if people want to go find out about these things, they can go look for themselves. And again, that relieves the seller and you as an agent of liability. Okay? That's the key to an advisory. All right, this is going to be a little bit wrong because this is a presentation I did the other day. But the median price home in California is about $470,000. And I believe the median price home in San Diego County, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it about 560, 570, something like that? Am I close?
It changes.
Yeah. But the point is, what if you discovered that your NHD provider limited their liability to $100,000? My point is, this would fall way short of what you would really need. So, let's talk about the last thing here, and that's going to be the most important pages of your NHD report, to me, are going to be the terms and conditions. Because what do you typically find in the terms and conditions page? And I'll put it up on the screen so you can see it. Can you see it?
Small print.
Yeah, it's fine print disclaimers. Okay? So, the fine print, education, and experience. How can we put this together? I do it like this. Education is what you get when you read the fine print. Experience is what you get when you don't. So, disclaimers should be top of mind for all real estate agents who order NHD reports from providers in a non-regulated industry. So, these are real NHD reports. These are real disclaimers. Okay, what's this one say? I've shaded out the name of the company, but What's important, what does it say here? If you look at this little box, probably the last page of the report, it says that the company shall have no duty to defend you if they make a mistake. What does this company say? Yeah, it says limitations of liability, again, probably the last 1 or 2 pages of the report. What's it say here? It says this company shall have no duty to indemnify the recipients or to defend or pay any attorney's fees, costs, or expenses incurred by the recipients. So let's stop here for a second and define who these people are. Who's the recipient of an NHD report? It's the seller and the seller's agent. Those are the people that seek protection from the third party that they order reports from. And what's the third party saying here? Don't come to me if there's a mistake here. We have no duty to defend you. What's this company say? They have a maximum liability of $100,000. What's this company say? What this says is, should it become necessary for the company to give testimony or consult with a client, a separate and special arrangement and an additional fee will apply. The client shall be responsible for any additional time, fees, and charges of the company. I mean, is anybody comfortable with language like that? That's completely open-ended. You have no idea what you're on the hook for. So you got to read the fine print. How about this one? Shall not be responsible or liable for errors in the tax data it obtains from third-party suppliers. So that complex Mello-Roos disclosure that is so important when you sell properties in special assessment districts, the company that gives you that information is off the hook by just telling you, hey, we're not responsible if there's an error in that. What's this one say? The recipients in each of them expressly waive the benefits of California Civil Code 2778. What's this one say? The same thing. The recipients in each of them expressly waive the benefits of California Civil Code 2778. Does anybody there know what that means? What is California Civil Code 2778? And more importantly, what are you waiving when the company is telling you that? 2778 confirms the NHD company's obligation to reimburse your legal expenses and establishes the NHD provider's obligation to defend you if requested to do so. So the company, darling, would you give me some water, please? So you go to this company to provide you with information to protect your liability, and the company says in their terms and conditions, hey, you're waiving your right to have me defend you and pay for your defense. This is what's wrong with non-regulation. Nobody would knowingly waive the benefit of a defense. And what's the seller saying? My real estate agent has a fiduciary duty to safeguard my liability. I don't want assumptions, I want assurances. And at the same time, I'm not asking my agent to give me the cheapest report. In fact, it's quite the contrary. I want an NHD report that satisfies my legal disclosure requirements while at the same time protecting my liability in the event of an error that ultimately leads to litigation. So in summary, a non-regulated industry does not work to your advantage. Thank you. Non-regulation puts more pressure on you to select a company that fully complies with your legal disclosure requirements. Next. Excuse me. Sellers seek protection from their agents, not bargains that jeopardize their liability. When I was in retail a long time ago, this is something I learned a long time ago. The bitterness of a bad product lingers long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten.
Ooh,
And last, why would any professional real estate agent trust their liability with an entrepreneur-owned NHD company? California, 95% of NHD providers are unqualified entrepreneurs that provide non-compliant reports. So, with Disclosure Source, we satisfy all of your legal disclosure requirements. We have zero meaningless subjective disclosures. There are no stated liability limits. We have a qualified geologist on staff. There is no escape clause like 2778. We are part of a Fortune 500 company. That alone should really tip the scales in your decision making. Why would you use anybody other than a company with deep pockets? And we provide you with free flood certs whenever the property is in a flood zone. And we also support these platforms, SkySlope, Disclosure.io, and Glide. And I'll tell you, one of the best things about this is these reports cost you, as a real estate agent, $0. Your seller pays $99 at the close of escrow. Okay? Any questions?
I had one and I forgot.
So when we get these disclosures, is there like a, I'm sorry, I'm kind of new and I don't know.
Sorry, you're here.
Is there like if there's something wrong, really wrong, is it flagged, is it red, or do we have to read through the whole thing?
No, yeah, good.
I don't know.
Good question. We have a summary page about 3 pages into the report that will summarize all of the findings in the report. So that would be the thing that you would look at. Now, I would suggest that as soon as you take a listing, you order the report, because you don't have to pay for it unless and until escrow closes. But you could look at all of those disclosures, and if there's a question on there, then you could give me a call, you can give Jan a call. I would suggest you give me a call. And Jan would filter that phone call to me anyway. I want to be a part of your team. So if you have a client, and believe me, buyers and sellers alike have questions on these reports because they don't understand them. I'm really good at talking to people in a language that they can appreciate and understand. I don't talk over their heads. I talk in a very direct way about what these things mean, and my whole goal is to remove the fear that these people have about stuff they know nothing about.
We also have maps. We have the first 2 pages is the local mapping and the state. Okay, so right on those pages at the bottom, it'll say is in the area or is not.
Yeah.
So the first 2 pages will tell you, and then that first I think it's the 3rd or whatever, will tell you, and it'll be checked, and it's interactive. So if it says it is, they can click right onto that, and it'll take them to the report for all the information.
Yeah, so there's simple little paragraphs in there that explain what the reports are, and sometimes the source of information, etc. Okay?
Are you guys same price?
Yes. All reports in the industry are all about the same price, between $75 and $100. If you're going to add an environmental report, which is what our report does, for $99 with Disclosure Source, you get a natural hazard disclosure report, you get a compliant tax and assessment report, and you get an environmental summary that will give you information regarding environmental sites within a mile of the subject property. You know, the environmental report has nothing to do with the subject property. It has to do with what's around the subject property. The tax report and the NHD report are about the subject property in any zones that the subject property is in. And as you can see right here on this map right here, you know, the color of that area identifies a hazard zone that's associated with that property. And the good thing about having a map is that you could show somebody that map and say, not only is the subject property in that hazard zone, but this entire area is in the same hazard zone.
You might
So
wanna,
it takes
Chuck,
any
Chuck, you might wanna,
perceived-
Chuck, excuse me, you might wanna put the camera at a different angle, cause it just looks white. Doesn't look like we can see that page.
All right, so let's see if I were to do.
Or tilt the screen,
Oh,
Just the glare from the light.
the glare from, yeah.
let's see. All right, let's see. Let's see if I can do this. Wait, am I gonna see what I'm looking at?
Or do you have one on your desk?
No, I don't have one on my desk. Oh,
Oh, there you go, that was getting better, there you go.
there you go.
But I don't know if you can see the lines, but bring it down where you can see the legend. There, that's much better. Anyway, the bottom of that map page is what
Hey,
I
again,
was
if you
talking
guys
about.
could see me right now, I'm like a gymnast. Right
Okay, I have a question.
There you go.
If my buyer, well, if my clients ask, what is this?
Yeah.
What should I say?
If we don't know.
Like,
What is
you know
what
how
is
like a
this?
first time buyer is like, what is this?
What is this report?
Yeah.
They could call me or they can call Chuck,
Okay.
and we will
That's fantastic.
explain it,
Oh,
'cause
that's nice.
we don't want you doing it, I
So
mean,
much work.
you don't wanna say something?
Look,
Yeah,
I would answer this way. If you get a title report and there's a question on an easement, who do you call?
Title officer.
Yeah.
Okay, so if there's issues on the report, just call me.
Oh, that's
and
not what I meant.
I will be your partner in your transaction as it applies to NHD. Look, I just think, I'll just throw my personal
No,
opinion.
but that's not what I meant. I mean, yes, that's really nice that you guys are there. But what I
Okay.
meant was like a lot of times first time buyers will say something like, what is this? Do I have to read this? What is, you know,
Yeah.
so I wanna give like a quick summary
Okay,
of like,
all right. So the way, to a buyer, you would say, well, California law requires the seller to disclose the presence of natural hazards on the property. This report will summarize the natural hazards that may or may not affect the subject property. Now, I'll tell you, there's a couple things that, pardon me?
California law requires the seller to disclose, what did you
The
say?
presence of natural hazards or natural hazard zones that would affect the subject property.
That will affect subject
The
property.
subject property, okay.
I like that, thank you.
You bet.
Okay, good. Well, I don't know this, I'll call him.
Yep.
I need a card. Yeah,
A lot of these.
seller's choice.
I would never put seller's choice into the contract,
I
I would
always did,
name it, and then a lot of times they'll say, well, we've already ordered it with this.
yeah.
But sometimes that $100,
I've done, natural, disclosure source or seller's choice, but I'll take seller's choice out now.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Hey, you know what? Guys, listen to
Me
this.
too.
If you write on your contract seller's choice, there is a company called Seller's Choice Disclosures. So,
What?
Yes.
Oh
Yeah.
my, that's why they named it that.
That's funny.
They know that we put seller's choice.
Oh my god, that's creepy.
Isn't it?
yeah.
Shady.
That's why it's an
So
unregulated industry.
somebody figured out that agents just put Seller's Choice on stuff. So
Oh.
they thought they would just call their company Seller's Choice. I'm just saying, so
That's
Sneaky.
You know,
so bad.
be specific with what you want.
Disclosure source is the one.
That's all I use.
Are you gonna talk about flood certs?
You want to know about flood search? You got a couple more minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. These are the things that are new with our report and with our company. And one thing is about flood search. What I mentioned in my presentation is automatically, if the property is located in a flood zone, Disclosure Source will provide you with a flood cert. So I want to explain to you what a flood cert is. We also have now a mudslide and debris flow advisory. And this is important because After our state suffers from wildfires, followed by heavy rain, the result could be like that picture shows you, mudslides and debris flows that a couple of years ago were pretty prominent in Santa Barbara County and Ventura County. So we've created an advisory that we'll talk about that, and I'll talk about that in a second. So let's talk about flood search for a second, because this is pretty good stuff here. They're also called standard flood hazard determination forms, and this is what they look like. Now, a couple of facts about flood certs. Flood certs are not a required disclosure document of the seller. Sellers don't have to provide this information. A flood cert does not eliminate the requirement of flood insurance, and it may not even be accepted by the buyer's lender nor the buyer's insurer. But what does a flood cert do, and what's the purpose of a flood cert? A flood cert will verify if the structure on a property that's located in a flood zone is also located in the flood zone. Does that make sense to you, the way that I worded that?
No.
So okay, so let me just show you. Let's see what this slide says. Flood cert versus NHD report. An NHD report prepared exclusively for the seller to satisfy their legal disclosure requirements according to California Civil Code 1102. A flood cert is prepared exclusively for lenders pursuant to the Flood Disaster Protection Act of 1973. Some facts about flood zones. Flood zones are based on elevations. NHD companies report on the parcel, not on the structure or the house. Okay? So, a special flood hazard zone means it's any type A or V FEMA flood zone is disclosed if the property is partially or entirely in that zone. Let me show you a map. So when we look at this map, here's a parcel. This would be the flood zone. So we are going to report that this parcel is in a flood zone. So when you get the NHD report, it's going to be checked off, yes, the property's in a flood zone. Just because of that little part of the parcel in the flood zone. Just as much as this parcel's in a flood zone. So whether it's in a little bit or it's in a lot, you're going to be in a flood zone. But what if it looked like this? What if the parcel at maximum flood, the entire parcel is flooded, but the house is at an elevation that it took it out of the flood zone? If the structure is higher than the base flood elevation, flood insurance may be waived. A flood cert would help in this situation. So here's a little better example. Here is a FEMA flood map. The shaded area is the flood map. You can see the parcel of this property right here. Okay? So the parcel is clearly located in the flood zone. But the structure is clearly out of the flood zone. So, the NHD report would show the parcel, and it's going to be determined as in a flood zone. You can see it there. It's in a flood zone. A little better picture. Here's the flood cert. Here's the flood cert on the same property. And all you have to do on the flood cert is you look at D. And what does D say? The D says, is the building in the special flood hazard area? And it's checked off as a no. Okay? Flood certs don't eliminate the requirement of flood insurance, but it's the first step of a process of eliminating the requirement of flood insurance. First thing would be a flood cert. Next would be an elevation certificate. And if approved, you get a letter of map revision, which the lender could then use to waive the requirement of flood insurance. Okay? That's what that means. It'll let the buyer know that the structure on the property that they're purchasing is either in the flood zone or out of the flood zone. If it's out of the flood zone, then they could hire a land surveyor to go prepare an elevation certificate. The elevation certificate then gets sent to FEMA. FEMA then sends back a letter of map revision in which the lender will look at it, and that would verify that the structure is out of the flood zone, eliminating the risk for flood insurance, or eliminating the risk of flooding. Therefore, the requirement of flood insurance would be waived. That's what that means. Okay? That's about all I have.
Any questions?
Oh, this is a lot.
Great.
I didn't know this much.
Glad I came.
A lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff to know, but that's why you surround yourself with experts that can help you in this field. And that's really, like, I feel like I'm auditioning in a very odd way this morning to be a part of your team.
Oh, I have a question. Like I missed the beginning. I was texting. So, who are you, and how long have you been doing this, and what have you been doing?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I was a title rep for about 3 years back in the late 90s, and I really didn't like it. And then I found a position at a natural hazard disclosure company prior, it was in 1998. In April, the law took effect in June. So I took a job with a company, and I got into the field in April and started telling agents about this new law that was going to take effect in June. So I've been in the industry for 22 years. I was recruited to go to work for Fidelity in 2001. So I've been working with Fidelity for almost 20 years. I'm the vice president of Disclosure Source. I'm head of sales. I work all over the state of California. I've been certified to do DRE classes for 2-hour credits. I work at the board all the time. Matter of fact, SDAR has me, I'm scheduled to do 4 presentations up there in the next several months. I work with boards all over the state of California. I'm in conversation presently with CAR to become part of their educational platform that they're going to start providing about NHDs. Hey, I love what I do. I love my job. I see a great problem in our industry, and that's what I talk about. I don't want my presentations, although I'm going to try to sell you my report for sure, but my presentation really concentrates on what's wrong with non-regulation and why that doesn't work to your advantage. Because I think at the end of the day, the person that gets screwed over is the seller. The seller doesn't have a choice of what NHD company they want. And if you guys were sellers and not real estate agents, and you knew nothing about the industry, I think that you would think these reports cost $1,000, maybe more or less. They're relatively inexpensive. At $100, you don't pay for it. But our company, I'm proud to say I work for a company that's a stand-up company that does things the right way in an industry full of people that don't do things the right way. And I try to just wave that banner that there's a right way to do things and the wrong way to do things. And the person that's most exposed to it's going to be the seller.
Oh, one more question. So
Yes.
there's Disclosure Source and Property ID and Seller's Choice. What other companies are there?
Well, there was a slide that has
Oh,
like
yeah,
40 of them.
there's like 60 companies that I know about
Yeah.
there.
Oh my gosh, but nobody else really uses them, do they?
Well, a lot of them are internet companies, so I don't know who uses them. I will tell you this. Our company is one of the top 3 companies that do business in California by a long shot. Property ID would be one of the other ones, but I don't want to talk about Property ID. They're just really not the company I would use.
What is the limit of your insurance?
We have a good question. We have $60 million of errors and emissions insurance. that represents 3 times more than our nearest competitor. I think our nearest competitor has 20 million. We have 60 million, and look, that's a lot of insurance, probably more than you need. But that tells me that my company takes care of their business. It's a Fortune 500 company. They have stockholders they need to take care of, and they want to do things the right way so that we don't get sued. Look, people, we live in a litigious state. We work in a litigious industry. You can't be more careful.
And that protects the seller, the broker, the agent.
Our
and the
E&O
escrow.
protects the seller, the seller's agent, the escrow, the TC, everybody involved in the transaction that could possibly be sued for non-disclosure or wrong disclosure are covered under our E&O.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, how'd that go, guys? Was that all right?
It was really
That's
good.
great, thank you.
Educational.
Okay. I sincerely apologize for not being there with you. Jan told me that we had a meeting that was canceled.
I just realized which one it was. It's our company one with Debbie next Monday. That's the one I was talking about.
There you go. So I assumed that she was talking about today.
Today,
and
I'm
that
sorry.
was it. So, but I'm glad we were
Well, you
able
know
to
what
put it
assuming
together
does.
for you guys. I hope you'll consider our company on your next transaction.